The fate of sustainability programs, supply chains react to the latest tariffs, and the health of our supply chain industry. Pull up a chair and join us as the editors of DC Velocity discuss these stories as well as news and supply chain trends on this week's Logistics Matters podcast. Hi, I'm Dave Maloney. I'm the Group Editorial Director at DC Velocity. Welcome. Logistics Matters is sponsored by ID Label. Have a new warehouse project, WMS conversion, reconfiguration, or new facility? ID Label is here to help. ID Label manufactures durable labels and signs for your warehouse, and their in-house team also installs them. Visit idlabelinc.com to request a free label sample pack for your next project. ID Label. When we do the barcodes, you can do more. As usual, our DC Velocity senior editors Ben Ames and Victoria Kickham will be along to provide their insights into the top stories of this week. But to begin today, supply chains are among the largest users of our world's energy, yet our industry is one of the most advanced in advocating for sustainability. But as political winds shift dramatically in Washington, many environmental policies may be on the chopping block. Where do our industry's sustainability efforts lie going forward? To find out, I recently spoke to Dr. Robert Sroufe. He's a professor of sustainability at the Falk School of Sustainability and Environment at Chatham University in Pittsburgh. Here's our conversation. Welcome, Dr. Sroufe. It's good to have you with us today.
Thank you, David, and thank you also to Logistics Matters with DC Velocity for covering these types of topics.
It's our pleasure. So you're a professor of sustainability at the Falk School of Sustainability and Environment at Chatham University. Can you tell me a little bit about your program there? It's kind of unusual for a college to have a school of sustainability.
Yeah, so we're the second sustainability school in the United States. I have a joint appointment with the business school. And within the School of Sustainability, though, we cover all things that are sort of environmental science related, urban planning. We have pillars that we align with in terms of our curriculum that involve sustainable community, sustainable business, and sustainable food and agricultural systems. And in that capacity, we have a university campus even that kind of walks the talk. So we have goals of carbon neutrality on campus. We generate our own renewable energy on campus. We have bioswales. We grow our own food. So we have a certified organic farm as part of the campus for this. We're getting grid scale batteries on farm. We are on this location. We also have microgrids, and we're looking into fleet vehicles changing out to all electric and being able to utilize those in different ways and have data collection and all of this. You know, the work I do with graduate students at Chatham University in our School of Sustainability and our School of Business involves live projects with companies trying to tackle these sustainability problems. It's baked into my research and books on developing sustainable supply chains to drive value and what we do and find in terms of sustainability being part of every business function. So all these systems come together to make a more innovative business proposition for anyone willing to take on that kind of challenge.
So your university is very committed, obviously, to sustainability.
We're trying to walk the talk.
By their nature, our supply chains and transportation in particular leave rather large carbon footprints. It just simply takes a lot of energy to move goods around the world. What are the consequences if we ignore the impacts that our supply chains are making on the environment?
Yeah, you're exactly right with that. And if we think about, and if firms actually measure their footprint, I want to also kind of flip that and say, you know, we can start figuring out what our handprint would be. If our footprint is negative, what's our handprint in terms of what would be positive? So at times I take a step back from this and say, you know, it's kind of hard to ask firms to be innovative if we ask them to rely on 150-year-old technology in their energy systems and transportation systems. You know, we know as of just this last year from Lawrence Livermore Laboratories that we're wasting about just over 61% of all the energy we generate in the United States. And that energy goes to buildings, it goes to transportation. And, you know, if you think about that in terms of transportation industries, you know, other reports have shown that we're wasting about 81% of every gallon of gasoline burned in an internal combustion engine vehicle. These vehicles have been around for over 100 years. Our food travels 1,500 miles and we waste 40% of it either along the way or at the end as we add all that up. And for me, these are very wasteful systems. If we think about this in terms of, you know, we can think about energy and systems that it provides and system services. Transportation is just one of those services. but I want firms to be more innovative and not stick with old technology and think that all we're looking at when talking about sustainability of the environment are the negative impacts of this.
So there obviously is a lot of room for improvement.
Absolutely. I mean, for all those systems and all that waste, that's lifelong employment for people that just want to get rid of waste in systems and think about how we can be more innovative, how we can invest in things that we've been subsidizing basically for the last 100 years. And what would we want to subsidize for the next 100 years? And how much better would those systems be? I like thinking about it in those terms.
Are there ways that we can better manage and actually measure the impacts that we have on the environment throughout our supply chains?
Yeah, great question. There's so much going on in the reporting space. So for those companies that are trying to figure this out, I usually say look at the sustainability reports of large multinational companies that distribution and logistic companies want to provide their services to. Those big companies are signaling what's already important. And then the supply chain logistic companies can figure out how they fit with that. If you look, all the S&P 500 companies have sustainability reports. Other go-to places for resources to understand measurement and management involve the Global Reporting Initiative, or GRI. It's the de facto global standard for this. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol to understand what we control known in scope 1, what we get from the grid in scope 2, and scope 3 emissions are basically everything else. So you can understand what you're going to be held accountable for, or where you want to be able to understand what you measure and count for this. So these are all things that kind of fit into the measurement and management piece of this. And then add to that SASB, SASB, the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board. It'll tell you what's most material for your industry or for those industries you're trying to service to make sure you can align with and invest in things that are material to your company and the services that you provide. So these are the ways in which companies can decarbonize and create value and not just spend resources on a one-off green project to say, look what we're doing, and it's this. Instead, it can be baked into the infrastructure of the company itself and the value that is then extracted or created from doing this.
Of course, we have a new administration in Washington that has canceled a lot of the environmental initiatives of the previous administration, including participation in the Paris Climate Accords, increased emphasis on fossil fuels, and also reversing the move towards electric vehicles. So, where does that leave our nation in reducing the impacts of climate change?
Yeah, great question. In the time of uncertainty, I want people to think about what can we control, what can we not control. So when this happened last time, because we did see it happen last time, but we are part of global economic systems that are interconnected. And the last time this happened, governors and mayors stepped up and still committed and pledged to be part of the Paris Accord and to look at carbon reduction goals or decarbonization. In the United States, we actually have over 100 cities that have set goals or been part of a pledge to be carbon neutral. If we think about globally and how we're connected, there's over 1,000 cities that have pledged to reach carbon neutrality. So these are all part of major initiatives, if you want to call it our moonshot of this time. And let's get behind things like this that can help improve environmental impacts, also improve our health and productivity, and have a good ROI behind them, because many cities around the world are doing this. And already on global platforms, 30% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions already have a price on them. We've been using a social cost of carbon dioxide as a price within the United States since the Reagan administration started it. So I think we ebb and flow with what's going on globally and nationally in different ways, but we also know that customers are out there looking for this data. They've been telling companies and logistics providers that they'll get more business from them if they can supply them, with not just the physical goods and the movement of these things, but also the data behind it and the emissions of those supply chain and logistics companies. There's a renewed push for us to look at these energy systems and think about companies that are innovative and support those innovative systems, those innovative companies that are not wasting money and wasting resources. It will cost us money to do these things, but if we continue with business as usual, we're instead amplifying negative impacts from the past that we know could be more innovative and more better in the future. So I think it's a tragic place to stop if we think it's just going to be canceled and nothing's going to move forward. But instead, all these other initiatives are taking place already by innovative companies, locally, regionally, nationally, and globally. And that's what I want to get behind.
I assume it will be difficult to make good progress, though, if you don't have government support and, in particular, government funds to help drive sustainable initiatives.
Yeah, and that's always a tough one, right? So if we keep in mind that the fossil fuel industry has been subsidized for the last 100 years in terms of our energy inputs to a lot of these systems that have a tremendous amount of waste within them. And even at this time globally, there's more than $11 million a minute subsidizing these fossil fuel companies. I don't think that's really any different than what's been happening for a number of decades before this. So there may be some change, a ripple in this in time. But it kind of goes back to my earlier thinking, what do we really want to invest in for the next 100 years? And where is the innovation in continuing to do the same thing or thinking that doing the same thing should be what we do in the future?
Are good business practices and sustainable business practices mutually exclusive?
Yeah, and for this, I think absolutely not, right? So back to some of those earlier comments. If you hired 100 people on January 1st of this year, and by the end of the year, you found out that 61 out of those 100 people created only hot air and friction in your company, would you still be employing them at the end of the year? There's so much we can do to decarbonize, to create jobs, electrify everything, to better manage subsidies and provide incentives for clean tech, renewables, and other systems. And these are perfectly intersection points for high performance buildings, improvements in transportation, and some of my own work on buildings, in the past found that we could bring energy retrofit projects and their payback periods down to really interesting levels. If the ROI for these things was maybe 5 years to begin with, we included environmental impacts avoided, maybe ROI in that payback period comes down to 3 years. And if we actually included human health and productivity impacts, we're looking at payback periods of maybe 4 months for things. So I think we need to also start looking at and what really kind of understanding what is a good business practice, because it's a more sustainable business practice and they're not separate and they're not involving trade-offs. It's a dynamic performance frontier that we're only getting better at measuring and managing.
You had mentioned a couple of examples of some good environmental best practices that businesses can do and supply chain managers should be doing. Are there some that are just easily affordable that we should be doing now?
Yeah, easy, affordable, always tough ones, right? To think of where is the low-hanging fruit. But if we kind of take a step back from this again, if we perceive these things and I guess look at this in a way where, why are they perceived as not affordable in the first place? So I think there's some misinformation, some bad information, and other things that kind of get in the way of this. And if we think about all that waste that's in our systems that I talked about before, and how we are not holding anyone accountable for wasted emissions into the biosphere, the air, the land, the water, all of that is something that we can do a better job of measuring, managing, and controlling into the future and not waiting for someone else to do it. So strategic sustainable supply chains are the connections and the enablers of more sustainable energy systems, food systems, material systems, and decarbonizing sustainable supply chains as much as possible, show that stakeholders up and down the value chain can be involved with more innovative companies that do this, that contribute to global, national, regional, and local efforts. And the good thing about this, right, is that there's local, state, regional, national level incentives for this in terms of what we want to signal that's important to support through subsidies and through other things. So if we electrified vehicles, we'd spend 90% less on the energy inputs to those vehicles. If we do this with our homes, we can bring our home energy consumption down, our building energy consumption down. I can drive a passenger car for less than $200 a year for 10,000 miles. And I do it from a net positive home. I generate my own electricity. What if all buildings did that? And what if all buildings offloaded energy to batteries, to grids, to transportation systems? And I try to think about it in those ways. And that's kind of the big Uber, view of this from above. It comes down to really basics and understanding your utility bills. Where you can actually do this is based on things like your utility company, working with them, and incentive systems through those providers of energy. So it comes in multiple ways, but we know every building can be more energy efficient. Transportation vehicles can be more energy efficient when we're moving things, and all the other systems that we're connected to, energy, food, water, have opportunities for this. So I don't think there's any one approach that's standardized for everyone, but instead it's up to those companies to look for those things that best fit for where they are and the local incentives and regional incentives that are available to them.
We've been talking to Dr. Robert Sroufe. He's the Falk Chair of Social Responsible Business and Professor of Sustainability at the Falk School of Sustainability and Environment at Chatham University in Pittsburgh. Thank you again, Dr. Sroufe, for being with us today. Now let's take a look at some of the other supply chain news from the week. And Ben, the White House termed Wednesday as Liberation Day, the day the administration announced all the new tariffs. But it seems that supply chain leaders are feeling more shackled than liberated by the tariffs. What's the general reaction that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think that intro is just about right. We often talk about supply chain disruptions on the podcast, and that has come from a lot of sources in recent years, unfortunately. Of course, the pandemic, but things like hurricanes and floods and geopolitical events and even regional wars. But this week we saw another type of disruption, and that came from right here at home. And as you say, that's the tariffs that were announced by the Trump administration on Wednesday afternoon. These were large-scale tariffs levied on nearly every nation that the U.S. trades with. And they came on top of previous tariffs, some that had been implemented earlier in the Trump administration, some from the preceding Biden administration, some from the first Trump administration. This has been going on for some time. But when you add them all up, the impact that we're seeing now will be a truly large fee. And of course, as a reminder, tariffs are taxes that are paid by American companies that import goods when freight reaches a U.S. border. So we're facing a situation where those U.S. companies will see their profit margins squeezed, and many of them will decide or be forced to pass along those new costs in the form of higher prices for U.S. consumers. So the question is, what do economic experts think about the new policy? I've read a lot of reports on that issue this week from places like Moody's and Carney. And the broad answer is that analysts say that the new tariffs introduce economic risks, such as higher prices, possible inflation, possible recession. To take one example, economist Jason Schenker from Prestige Economics said that the tariffs raise business uncertainty and present inflation and recession risks. He said that recession and stagflation risks are rising with tariff uncertainty, and U.S. consumer confidence has recently fallen while consumer inflation rates remain elevated.
Well, Ben, those would all be very serious impacts if they happen. But haven't we seen this in the past that the White House could use this just as leverage for trade deals and could postpone or cancel the tariffs if they can make a deal?
Great question, because, we saw that very thing happen just a month ago with new tariffs from the Trump administration threatened on Canada and Mexico. And in fact, that's what major U.S. trade groups really hope is happening this time again. But here's the thing, because even if it is, groups like the National Retail Federation and RILA, which is the Retail Industry Leaders Association, have said that American companies are actually already incurring certain costs for coping with the tariffs, whether they happen or not, since it really takes time to shift supply chain routes and suppliers. And, they can change from current supply chain models optimized for speed or optimized for low cost to more flexible models, but that extra flexibility comes with a price. And that's also true for factories. The National Association of Manufacturers said that many manufacturers in the United States already operate with thin margins, and the high cost of new tariffs threaten that investment, jobs, supply chains, and in turn, America's ability to outcompete other nations. That's what the National Association of Manufacturers said. So several of these groups say they welcome President Trump's focus on reducing foreign trade barriers, on holding trading partners accountable, and on restoring fairness for American business, but they really don't want him to do it this way, because supply chain disruption is just as expensive and chaotic when it comes from tariffs as when it comes from hurricanes.
Yeah, I think most people agree that while some of the aims may be good, there has to be better ways of achieving these trade goals than the way we're seeing with all these tariffs.
Yeah, there's been a lot of voices talking about it this week, but that is the broad conclusion. Yep.
Thank you, Ben.
Glad to.
And Victoria, staying on this topic, some of the economic uncertainty being brought on by the U.S. tariffs and trade policies are being reflected in the latest Logistics Managers Index, What's the report saying?
Yes, that's right, Dave. The March Logistics Managers Index report emphasized all this volatility we've been observing. Economic activity in logistics expanded in March, but at a much slower rate compared to the first 2 months of the year. The LMI was 57.1 in March, down nearly 6 points from February and down 5 points from January, both of which represented the fastest rates of growth in the overall index in about 3 years, since June 2022. I should pause and note that an LMI reading above 50 indicates expansion in the industry, and a reading below 50 indicates contraction. So we're still above 50, so that means supply chains are humming along pretty well. But there was a shift in March, and it was driven by sharp declines in industry price and cost metrics. Essentially, and we talked about this last month, inventory costs, warehousing prices, and transportation prices all rose sharply in January and February as companies did a couple of things. They replenished inventory following the holiday peak, but they were also rushing to stock up and avoid impending tariffs. The trend reversed this month, with activity slowing considerably toward the end of March as more of these trade controls were about to be implemented.
Victoria, what does this mean then going forward for supply chains?
Well, according to the LMI researchers, the lower inventory and warehousing metrics may indicate a stabilizing of the market, but the decline in transportation prices could be a cause for concern, primarily because transportation prices dipped below capacity at the end of March. And let me just explain that. So a negative freight inversion, that's when transportation capacity expands faster than transportation prices, usually signals a downturn in transportation markets. And we saw this in 2022 and 2023, as I'm sure I don't need to remind our listeners of the freight recession. Now, we'd need to see several months of this dynamic to conclude that there's a downturn, but the LMI researchers said this is something to keep an eye on. It's something that stood out to them. And that's because transportation markets are often a leading indicator for trends in the broader economy. So a sustained pullback in freight, could point to issues or problems in the overall economy. But again, this could be a blip, and in April, we could see the market shift back to the positive track it's been on, really for the past 11 months or so.
Well, let's hope that it does stay steady and continues to grow, but we'll just have to see how it all plays out.
Yes, like everything else these days. We seem to have to wait and see.
Lots of uncertainty right now in the market, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Victoria.
You're welcome.
We encourage listeners to go to dcvelocity.com for more on these and other supply chain stories. Also, check out the podcast notes section for some direct links to read more about the topics that we discussed today. And again, we'd like to thank Dr. Robert Sroufe of Chatham University for being our guest. We welcome your comments on this topic and our other stories. You can email us at podcast@agilebme.com. We also encourage you to subscribe to Logistics Matters at your favorite podcast platform. Our new episodes are uploaded on Fridays. And a reminder that Logistics Matters is sponsored by ID Label. Have a new warehouse project, WMS conversion, reconfiguration, or new facility? ID Label is here to help. ID Label manufactures durable labels and signs for your warehouse, and their in-house team also installs them. Visit idlabelinc.com to request a free label sample pack for your next project. ID Label. When we do the barcodes, you can do more. We'll be back again next week with another edition of Logistics Matters. Be sure to join us. Until then, have a great week.